I never expected to find myself standing in the middle of a blizzard, watching my neighbor drive away with my snow chains. But that's exactly what happened on that freezing February morning in Tahoe Vista, California. My name is Ryan Bergman, and I had just moved into the Mountain Ridge Estates community 3 months prior. The place seemed perfect at first: beautiful views of Lake Tahoe, well-maintained roads, and amenities that justified the steep HOA fees. What I didn't know was that the homeowners association was run by a woman named Patricia Hennington, who would become the bane of my existence. I woke up that morning to my phone buzzing with emergency alerts. A massive winter storm was bearing down on the Tahoe region, with predictions of up to 6 feet of snow over the next 48 hours. Highway 267 was already closed, and authorities were urging everyone to stay home unless absolutely necessary. I stumbled to my window and saw the world outside already blanketed in white, the snow falling so thick I could barely see my own driveway. My first thought was my job. I was a nurse at Tahoe Forest Hospital in Truckee, and I knew they'd need all hands on deck during a storm like this. People would have accidents, medical emergencies would pile up, and the hospital would be stretched thin. I grabbed my phone and saw 3 missed calls from my supervisor, Julie. I called her back immediately. "Ryan, thank God," she said, sounding frazzled. "We need you here. Half the night shift can't get home, and we're about to have a shift change nightmare. Can you make it in?" I looked out at the snow again. "I'll try. I've got snow chains and my Subaru should handle it. Give me an hour." I hung up and started getting ready, pulling on thermal layers, my scrubs, and my heavy winter coat. I grabbed my emergency bag that I kept packed for situations like this, extra clothes, snacks, water, and headed to the garage. My Subaru Outback sat there, reliable and ready, and I knew it could handle the snow if I put the chains on. That's when I realized I needed to get them from my storage shed out back. I trudged through the already foot-deep snow in my backyard, unlocked the shed, and grabbed the heavy-duty snow chains I'd bought specifically for emergencies like this. They weren't cheap, a solid $250 for a quality set that would actually last. I'd done my research after moving to Tahoe, knowing that mountain winters were nothing to mess around with. I was carrying them back to the garage when I heard a car engine. I looked over to see a white Mercedes SUV pulling into my driveway. The window rolled down, and there was Patricia Hennington, her perfectly styled blonde hair somehow maintaining its shape despite the blizzard. Her lips pursed in that perpetual expression of disapproval I'd come to recognize. "Ryan Bergman," she called out, her voice sharp even over the howling wind. "Where do you think you're going in this weather?" "I'm a nurse, Patricia. The hospital needs me." I kept walking toward my garage. She got out of her car, and I was shocked she'd even do that in this weather. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage and completely impractical boots. The HOA sent out an emergency notice an hour ago. No residents are to drive during this storm. It's a liability issue. I stopped and turned to face her. "Patricia, that's not legal. You can't prevent people from leaving their own property, especially during an emergency. I'm an essential worker." "The rules are the rules," she said, crossing her arms. "If you cause an accident or need rescue, it reflects poorly on our community. I'm going to have to insist you stay home." "You can insist all you want, but I'm going." I turned back to my garage. "Are those snow chains?" she asked suddenly. "Yes, and I really need to get going. You can't use those on our community roads. They damage the asphalt." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Patricia, it's currently being buried under 6 feet of snow, and once I'm out of the community, I'm on public roads where chains are actually required right now." This is ridiculous. But Patricia had already moved closer, and before I could react, she reached out and grabbed the chains from my hands. The woman was surprisingly strong for someone who looked like she spent more time at the spa than the gym. "Hey, give those back." I reached for them, but she'd already turned and was trudging back to her Mercedes. "You'll get these back when the storm is over and you've come to your senses about driving in these conditions," she called back. "Consider this confiscated for the safety of the community." I stood there in absolute disbelief as she threw my chains into her trunk and drove off down the snow-covered street. The whole interaction had taken maybe 3 minutes, but I was left standing there, dumbfounded and increasingly furious. I pulled out my phone and tried calling her, but she didn't answer. I then called the non-emergency police line, but they told me they were only responding to life-threatening emergencies during the storm, and that this sounded like a civil matter I'd need to handle after the weather cleared. I looked at my Subaru, then at the road conditions, and made a decision I probably shouldn't have. I got in my car and tried to make it to the hospital anyway. I made it exactly 2 miles before I started sliding on a turn and nearly went into a ditch. A Caltrans truck stopped and the driver got out shaking his head. "You got chains?" he asked. "Someone stole them," I said, feeling stupid saying it out loud. "Then you need to turn around. It's chains or you're not making it anywhere today." Highway patrol is already ticketing people without them. Defeated, I carefully turned around and made my way back home. I called Julie and explained what happened, and while she was understanding, I could hear the stress in her voice as she figured out how to cover the shifts. I felt terrible. The storm raged for 2 full days. I spent that time documenting everything, taking photos of the emails Patricia had sent me about HOA rules, screenshotting the weather alerts, writing down exactly what had happened. I also did some research on HOA authority in California and what Patricia had done. As it turned out, confiscating personal property wasn't within the HOA's rights, regardless of her justifications about safety or liability. When the storm finally broke on the 3rd day, I immediately went to Patricia's house. She lived in the largest home in the development, a massive mountain contemporary with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I rang the doorbell and waited. She opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ryan, hello. Glad to see you survived the storm." "I need my snow chains back, Patricia." "Oh yes, those. Actually, I have some bad news about that. Come in, come in." She stepped aside and I followed her into her pristine living room, everything white and chrome and probably not child-friendly in the slightest. She walked over to a closet near the entryway and pulled out a twisted, mangled mess of metal. "I'm afraid the storm damaged them. They were in my trunk and a tree branch fell on my car. The whole trunk was crushed. My Mercedes is totaled actually. It's really been a terrible few days." I took the destroyed chains from her, my hands shaking with anger. These weren't just damaged, they were deliberately destroyed. The links were cut in multiple places, the tensioners were bent at impossible angles, and there were tool marks clearly visible on the metal. No tree branch did this. "Patricia, these were cut. Look at these marks. Someone took bolt cutters or something similar to these." She shook her head, her expression one of exaggerated sympathy. "I know it looks that way, but that's what the impact did. You should see my car. The whole back end is completely destroyed. I've already filed an insurance claim. It was an act of God, really, nothing anyone could have done." "Show me the car then." "It's already been towed to the shop. They came first thing this morning." "Which shop?" "I don't see how that's relevant." "Look, Ryan, I'm sorry about your chains, but you need to take this up with your homeowner's insurance." The HOA has a clause in the CC and Articles about personal property and acts of nature. We're not liable. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You stole my property, destroyed it, and now you're trying to claim it was the storm. Are you serious right now? Her friendly demeanor evaporated instantly. I didn't steal anything. I confiscated items that were going to be used in violation of HOA rules. The subsequent damage was due to the storm. Now, I have a very busy day ahead of me, so if you'll excuse me. She walked to the door and opened it, clearly dismissing me. I left, but I wasn't about to let this go. I went home and immediately started making calls. First, I called every auto body shop in the Tahoe area asking if they'd received a white Mercedes SUV with storm damage. On the fifth call, I hit pay dirt. Big Bear Auto Body in Truckee had the car, brought in just that morning. Yeah, we've got it, the guy said. Pretty nasty damage, but weird, most of it looks old. The owner said a tree fell on it, but there's no paint transfer or anything you'd expect from that kind of impact. Honestly, looks more like old accident damage she's trying to claim on this storm, but hey, not my problem. Would you be willing to document that? I asked. Take photos, write up what you just told me. Who are you, her husband? No, I'm someone she's trying to defraud. She destroyed my property and is claiming her car damage did it. But if the car damage is old, then she's lying. There was a pause. Look, man, I can't get involved in people's personal drama. But what I can tell you is that if an insurance investigator comes asking questions, I'm going to tell them the truth about what I see. That damage is at least several weeks old, maybe more. The rust on the exposed metal doesn't lie. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called my own insurance company to report the theft and destruction of property. They took my statement and said they'd open a claim. When I mentioned the HOA president was the one who took them, the agent got quiet. Mr. Bergman, that's not a civil HOA dispute, that's theft. If she took your property and destroyed it, you need to file a police report. So that's exactly what I did. I drove to the Placer County Sheriff's Office and filed a formal report. The deputy who took my statement, a tired-looking guy named Officer Morrison, listened to my story with increasing interest. And you have proof she took them? He asked. I have my doorbell camera footage. I pulled out my phone and showed him. Sure enough, my Ring camera had captured the entire interaction, Patricia clearly taking the chains from me and putting them in her car. And the destroyed chains, in my trunk, I can show you. We went out and I showed him the mangled mess. He examined them carefully, took photos, and nodded. Yeah, these were cut deliberately. See these marks? That's a cutting torch. Someone really didn't want these chains to be functional again. She claimed a tree fell on her car during the storm. Did you see any tree damage to her vehicle? No, she says it was already towed to a shop. But I called around and found it. The guy at the shop says the damage looks weeks old and there's rust on the exposed metal. Officer Morrison's expression hardened. Okay, this is looking like theft and destruction of property, possibly fraud if she's trying to file a false insurance claim. We'll need to investigate. I'll need you to write out a complete statement and we'll go from there. I spent the next hour writing out everything that had happened, every detail I could remember. Officer Morrison took copies of my Ring footage and the photos I'd taken of the destroyed chains. He said they'd be in touch. I went home feeling like at least something was being done, but I was still out $250 and I'd missed 2 crucial shifts at work. I called Julie and explained everything, and she was sympathetic, but also frank. Ryan, I get it, and what she did was wrong, but I need to know if you're going to be reliable. Can you get new chains? Yeah, I'm ordering them today with rush shipping. I'll have them by tomorrow. Good, because we've got another storm system coming in this weekend and I'll need you." I ordered new chains, even more expensive ones this time at $300, and paid extra for overnight shipping. Then I settled in to wait for the investigation to proceed. 2 days later, Officer Morrison called me. "Mr. Bergman, we'd like you to come down to the station. We've got some updates on your case." I drove down immediately. When I arrived, Officer Morrison met me in the lobby and brought me back to a conference room. Inside was a woman in a sharp suit who introduced herself as Detective Sarah Chen from the Fraud Division. "Mr. Bergman, thank you for coming in," she said, shaking my hand. "Your case has gotten more interesting. We obtained a warrant for Miss Hennington's phone and financial records based on the evidence you provided, and we've discovered something concerning." She opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "Patricia Hennington has filed 17 insurance claims in the last 3 years, all for various incidents of property damage or theft. That's an unusually high number. We contacted her insurance company, and they confirmed they've been considering dropping her as a client due to suspected fraud, but they've never had enough evidence to prove it." "What does this have to do with my chains?" I asked. "We think your chains weren't the first thing she's done this with. We pulled HOA records and found 3 other complaints from residents about personal property that went missing after interactions with Miss Hennington. All of them dropped their complaints after she offered them small settlements from the HOA emergency fund." My jaw dropped. "She's been doing this to other people. It appears so. We've reached out to those residents and they've agreed to give statements. Combined with your video evidence and the body shop's documentation of her vehicle's actual condition, we have enough to charge her with theft, destruction of property, and insurance fraud." "How much trouble is she in?" Detective Chen leaned back in her chair. "In California, theft and destruction of property worth over $250 is a felony if there's a pattern of behavior, which we can establish. The insurance fraud is also a felony. She's looking at potentially several years in prison if convicted, though first-time offenders often get plea deals." "This seems like a lot for Snow Chains," I said, though I was glad they were taking it seriously. "It's not about the chains, Mr. Bergman. It's about a pattern of abuse of authority and fraud. People in positions of power, even small power like an HOA presidency, can't be allowed to steal from and defraud their neighbors without consequences. The other residents were too intimidated to push back. You weren't." Over the next few weeks, the case built momentum. Patricia was arrested at her home on a Wednesday morning. I heard about it from my neighbor George, who knocked on my door looking excited. "Did you hear? They arrested Patricia. There were 2 sheriff's cars in her driveway this morning." She was screaming about how this was harassment and she'd sue everyone. "Yeah, I heard," I said, not wanting to reveal my involvement yet. "Apparently it has something to do with theft and fraud. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for tonight. You should come." I went to the meeting that evening, held in the community clubhouse. The room was packed with residents, everyone talking in hushed, excited tones. The remaining HOA board members, 3 older men who seemed shell-shocked, called the meeting to order. "As you've all likely heard, Patricia Hennington was arrested this morning," said Tom, the vice president, a retired engineer. "We've been informed by law enforcement that she's been charged with multiple counts of theft, destruction of property, and insurance fraud. The board is conducting a full audit of HOA finances, and we've hired an attorney to help us navigate this situation." Hands shot up around the room. Tom called on people one by one. "What did she steal?" someone asked. Tom looked uncomfortable. "We can't discuss specifics of an ongoing investigation, but it appears personal property was taken from multiple residents over the past few years. Is the HOA liable? Another person asked. That's what we're working with our attorney to determine. We may need to do a special assessment if there are settlements or legal fees, but we're hoping our insurance will cover it. More questions flew, and then someone asked the one I'd been waiting for. Who filed the complaint that started all this? Tom hesitated, then said, "We're not going to reveal that. The person who came forward did the community a service and deserves privacy." But people were already looking around, trying to figure it out. George, sitting next to me, whispered, "It was probably one of the people on Boulder Court." Patricia was always hassling them about their landscaping. I kept quiet and let the meeting continue. By the end, the board had voted unanimously to remove Patricia from her position and place her on the community's banned list, meaning she couldn't use any common facilities or attend meetings until her legal situation was resolved. They also voted to hire a property management company to handle HOA operations temporarily while they figured out the full extent of the damage. As people filed out, Tom approached me. "Ryan, can I talk to you for a minute?" We stepped aside and he lowered his voice. "The detective called me. I know you're the one who reported Patricia. I just want to say thank you. I've been on this board for 5 years and she's been president for 3, and the whole time I knew something was off, but I could never put my finger on it. She ran the board like her personal fiefdom, and any time anyone questioned her, she'd shut them down." "Why didn't you say anything?" he sighed. "Because I'm retiring next year and I didn't want the hassle. I'm ashamed to admit it now. She was stealing from our neighbors, and I turned a blind eye because it was easier. Your courage in standing up to her is going to help a lot of people get justice." Over the next month, more details emerged. The investigation revealed that Patricia had been systematically taking items from residents, usually during HOA inspections, or when she had access to properties for official business. She'd take things that were valuable but not irreplaceable, things people might not immediately notice or might assume they'd misplaced. Gardening tools, small electronics, decorative items. She'd then sell them online and pocket the cash. The insurance fraud went deeper. She'd been filing false claims for years, staging incidents and blaming them on storms, burglaries, or accidents. The damaged Mercedes that supposedly justified destroying my chains had actually been in an accident 6 weeks earlier. Damage she'd never fixed specifically, so she could use it for a claim like this. 3 other residents came forward with stories similar to mine. Patricia had taken a leaf blower from one couple during a property inspection, claiming it was too loud and violated noise ordinances. She'd confiscated a drone from another resident, saying it violated privacy rules. Each time, the items were returned damaged or not at all, and she'd blamed the condition on various factors while citing HOA rules that didn't actually exist. The district attorney's office offered her a plea deal: plead guilty to reduce charges, pay restitution to all victims, resign from the HOA board permanently, and accept 2 years probation with community service. Patricia, apparently still convinced she could fight this, turned it down and demanded a trial. Her trial was scheduled for May, 3 months after the incident with my chains. I was called as a witness, along with the other victims and various experts. The prosecution's case was airtight, built on Ring camera footage, financial records, testimony from the body shop, and the pattern of behavior established by multiple victims. I had to take a day off work to testify. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Patricia sat at the defense table looking diminished somehow, her usual imperious attitude replaced with something that looked almost like confusion, as if she couldn't understand how she'd ended up here. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Ross, walked me through my testimony. I described the blizzard, Patricia taking my chains, her later returning them destroyed, and the clear evidence they'd been cut deliberately. I presented the ring footage, my receipts for both sets of chains, and the photos of the destroyed ones. Patricia's lawyer, a harried-looking public defender, tried to establish that I'd given Patricia the chains voluntarily and that I couldn't prove she'd destroyed them. But the video clearly showed her taking them despite my objections, and the expert testimony from a metallurgist confirmed the chains had been cut with a torch, not damaged by impact. The other victims testified to similar experiences. Margaret and Donald Torres described how Patricia had taken Donald's expensive leaf blower, returning it with the motor burned out, claiming she'd stored it in her garage, and the storm had caused a power surge. Kevin Park testified about his drone, which Patricia had confiscated and returned with the camera broken off, blaming rough handling during the storm. The most damning testimony came from Patricia's insurance companies and the forensic accountant who traced her claims. Over 3 years, she'd received over $40,000 in insurance payouts for incidents that were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. The destroyed property from residents she'd taken, sold, or destroyed for insurance purposes accounted for another $15,000. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, multiple counts of theft, destruction of property, insurance fraud, and abuse of position. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. I attended, along with the other victims. The judge, a stern woman named Honor Deborah Martinez, listened to victim impact statements. When it was my turn, I stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, what Patricia Hennington did to me wasn't just about stealing $250 snow chains. It was about abusing her position of trust in our community. I'm a nurse. I needed those chains to get to work during a blizzard when the hospital desperately needed staff. Her actions prevented me from helping people who needed medical care. Beyond that, she betrayed the trust every resident placed in her when she was elected to lead our HOA. She used that position to prey on her neighbors, to steal from them, and to defraud insurance companies, which ultimately raises rates for all of us. She showed no remorse, even when caught. She lied about a storm destroying my property when she deliberately destroyed it herself. That kind of calculated deception deserves real consequences. The judge nodded and made notes. After all the statements, she looked at Patricia, who stood with her lawyer. Miss Hennington, you were given a position of trust and authority in your community, and you systematically abused it for personal gain. The pattern of behavior demonstrated here shows someone who saw their neighbors not as fellow community members, but as targets for exploitation. You've shown no genuine remorse, and you rejected a reasonable plea agreement in favor of forcing your victims to relive their experiences in a trial. Taking all of this into consideration, I'm sentencing you to 3 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 18 months. Additionally, you're ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $62,500. You're also barred from serving in any HOA leadership position in California for life. Do you understand this sentence? Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Your Honor. Then we're adjourned. The judge's gavel came down. I watched as the bailiffs led Patricia away. I didn't feel triumphant or happy. Mostly I felt tired and a little sad that it had come to this, but I also felt like justice had been done. The HOA worked to repair its reputation over the following months. Tom stepped up as interim president, and they held new elections. A retired teacher named Barbara One, running on a platform of transparency and accountability. One of her first acts was to create a residents' Bill of Rights, clearly outlining what the HOA could and couldn't do, and establishing an independent review board for disputes. I received my restitution payment 6 weeks after sentencing, both for the original chains and the replacement set. The HOA also refunded 2 months of my HOA fees as an apology for Patricia's actions and the stress they'd caused. George became a good friend through all of this. One evening in late July, he invited me over for a barbecue. Several neighbors were there, and at one point, Margaret Torres approached me with her husband Donald. "Ryan, we never properly thanked you," she said. "We knew something was wrong when Patricia took Donald's leaf blower, but we were too scared to fight back. She threatened to fine us for every little thing if we made trouble. You standing up to her gave us the courage to come forward. We got our money back and our dignity." Donald shook my hand firmly. "You did a good thing, son. A hard thing, but a good thing." Later that evening, as the sun set over Lake Tahoe and people laughed and shared stories, I felt something I hadn't felt since moving to Mountain Ridge Estates. Like I actually belonged to a community. Not one ruled by fear and petty tyranny, but one where neighbors looked out for each other. Patricia's case made local news, then regional news. Other HOA horror stories started coming out across California, and there was a push in the state legislature to pass new laws limiting HOA authority and establishing clearer oversight. I was even contacted by a state senator's office to give testimony about my experience for a proposed bill. The following winter, when the first big storm was forecast, I made sure my new chains were easily accessible. As snow began to fall, I got the call from the hospital that they needed extra staff. This time, I put my chains on without incident and made it to work safely. During a break in my shift, I checked my phone and saw a message from George. It was a photo of the community entrance, the street signs barely visible through the heavy snow, with a caption, "Everyone made it home safe tonight. Real neighbors looking out for each other. Thanks for helping make this a real community." I smiled and pocketed my phone, heading back to help a patient. The storm outside raged on, but inside, I was warm with the knowledge that standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult and uncomfortable, had made a real difference. The insurance fraud case had ripples beyond just Patricia. The investigation uncovered that she'd coached 2 other HOA presidents in nearby communities on how to pad insurance claims, turning her petty thefts into something approaching an organized scheme. Those investigations were still ongoing when I last checked, with federal insurance fraud charges potentially coming. As for me, I stayed in Mountain Ridge Estates. Some people thought I'd want to move after all the trouble, but the community that emerged from Patricia's downfall was worth staying for. We became the kind of neighborhood I'd hoped for when I first moved in. People who helped each other during storms, who shared tools instead of stealing them, who resolved disputes with conversations instead of threats and retaliation. I even joined the HOA board eventually, not as president, but as the member at large in charge of emergency preparedness. My first initiative was creating a community emergency supply cache and a phone tree for medical professionals during disasters. When the next big storm hit, 3 of us with 4-wheel drives and chains formed a shuttle service, helping essential workers get to their jobs and bringing supplies to neighbors who couldn't get out. One afternoon in March, almost a year after the chain incident, I was working in my yard when a moving truck pulled up to Patricia's old house. A young family got out, parents with 2 small kids who immediately ran around the yard in excitement. The mom saw me watching and waved. I walked over and introduced myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Ryan, right next door. I'm Jennifer, this is my husband Marcus, and those tornadoes are Sophie and Jake," she said, laughing as her kids continued exploring. "We just moved from Sacramento." The realtor mentioned something about previous HOA issues. "We had a problem president who was stealing from residents. She's in prison now. But we've turned things around. New board, new policies, much better community." "That's good to hear," Marcus said. "We were a little worried about the HOA aspect, but the house was perfect and the price was great." "The price was probably good because of the history," I said honestly. "But I can promise you the current board is nothing like the previous president. If you ever have any issues or questions, feel free to knock on my door. We look out for each other here now." Jennifer smiled with obvious relief. "Thank you. That really means a lot." As I helped them carry in a few boxes, I thought about how much had changed in a year. A stolen set of snow chains during a blizzard had uncovered a pattern of theft and fraud that had been poisoning our community for years. Standing up to Patricia when she took my property had been scary and uncertain, but it had led to justice not just for me, but for everyone she'd victimized. The following winter was particularly brutal, with multiple storms hammering the Tahoe region. But our community handled it well. We checked on elderly neighbors, shared generator power during outages, and helped dig out anyone who got stuck. The emergency supply cache I'd helped establish came in handy when the grocery stores ran low, and the phone tree ensured everyone had someone to call if they needed help. During one particularly bad storm in January, my new chains got me to the hospital for a critical shift where we dealt with multiple emergency cases. On my way home, I passed Patricia's old Mercedes being used as a decoration in front of Big Bear Auto Body, a sign reading "Insurance fraud costs everyone" attached to it. The shop owner had bought it from the salvage auction and was using it as an educational display. I pulled into my driveway late that night, exhausted but satisfied. The house was warm, my chains had performed perfectly, and I'd helped save 2 lives during my shift. George had shoveled my walkway while I was gone, a kindness that had become common in our neighborhood. Inside, I made myself dinner and sat by the window watching the snow fall. My phone buzzed with a message from Barbara, the HOA president. "Just checking in on everyone. Ryan, did you make it home safe from work?" "Just walked in," I replied. "All good here." "Excellent. We've got 4 people with plows helping clear streets tomorrow if the storm lets up. You did good work setting up our emergency protocols. This is what community is supposed to be." I set down my phone and smiled. She was right. This was what community was supposed to be. Not one person wielding petty power over everyone else, but neighbors genuinely caring for each other, especially during hard times. The legal saga finally concluded that spring when the appeals court upheld Patricia's conviction and sentence. Her attempt to argue that HOA authority somehow exempted her from theft laws was firmly rejected. The restitution payments continued, garnished from what little income she made from her prison job. I heard through Tom that she tried to write letters to various board members, claiming she'd been misunderstood and that she was only trying to protect property values. No one responded. The community had moved on, and Patricia Hennington was now just a cautionary tale. We told new residents about what happens when HOA power goes unchecked. The state legislature did eventually pass new HOA oversight laws, partly inspired by cases like ours. HOA boards now had to carry specific insurance, maintain transparent financial records available to all residents, and face regular audits. There were also clearer rules about what HOAs could and couldn't regulate, with personal property specifically protected, unless it violated actual laws or clearly defined, reasonable rules. I was invited to Sacramento to attend the bill signing. Governor Newsom mentioned cases like mine in his remarks, talking about how HOAs should serve their communities, not rule them like fiefdoms. It was surreal to see my experience with stolen snow chains mentioned in the context of statewide reform, but also gratifying to know that something positive had come from it. 2 years after the initial incident, I was sitting in the community clubhouse for our annual HOA meeting. Barbara was presenting the year's financial report, showing how our fees had actually decreased slightly thanks to better management and the settlement from the insurance companies that had covered Patricia's fraud. The Community Reserve Fund was healthy, our amenities were well maintained, and resident satisfaction surveys were the highest they'd been in a decade. During the open forum portion, Jennifer, my neighbor who'd moved into Patricia's old house, stood up. "I just want to say how grateful my family is to be part of this community. We came from a neighborhood with no HOA, and I was nervous about the rules and restrictions. But what I've found here is something special. When our son Jake broke his arm last month, Ryan drove us to the hospital through a snowstorm because my husband had our car at work. When we had a pipe burst, 3 neighbors showed up within an hour to help. This is what I always hoped a community could be." There was genuine applause around the room. Barbara smiled and said, "That's the community Ryan Bergman helped create when he refused to accept abuse of power. Let's remember that it takes courage to stand up for what's right, and it takes all of us working together to maintain it." People turned to look at me and I felt my face flush. George, sitting next to me, patted my shoulder. "You earned this, buddy. Own it." After the meeting, several people thanked me again, even though it had been 2 years. I was gracious, but honestly a little tired of being the guy known for the snow chain incident. I wanted to just be Ryan, the nurse who lived at the end of Cedar Court. That summer, I started dating someone I'd met at the hospital, Sarah Lawson, a physical therapist. When I told her about the whole Patricia situation, she laughed in disbelief. "Wait, she just took your chains, like grabbed them and drove off." "Yep, and then destroyed them and tried to blame it on a storm." "That's the most HOA Karen story I've ever heard. How did you not lose your mind?" I documented everything, followed the legal process, and had a really clear video of her taking them. Also, she'd been doing similar things to other people for years, so once the investigation started, it all unraveled pretty quickly. Sarah shook her head. "I'm impressed you stayed in that community after all that. I would have moved." I thought about it. But the problem wasn't the community, it was one person abusing power. Once she was gone, the real community could emerge. Now it's actually great. She moved in with me that fall and got to experience her first Tahoe winter. When the first big storm came, she watched me put on my chains with practiced ease. "These the famous chains?" she asked, grinning. "Third set, actually. The original stolen and destroyed ones. The expensive replacement set I had to buy during the whole legal mess. And now these, which the community actually reimbursed me for as part of the settlement. So technically free chains. Technically very expensive chains that took 2 years and a criminal trial to get reimbursed." She laughed and kissed me. My hero, defender of snow chains and fighter of HOA tyranny. 3 years after the incident, Patricia was released on parole after serving 18 months. I heard she moved to Nevada, unable to find housing in California with her criminal record and the permanent ban from HOA leadership. Tom mentioned she tried to reach out to him, asking for a letter of recommendation for housing. He declined. "I don't wish her ill," Tom told me over coffee one morning. But I also can't vouch for someone who stole from our neighbors and showed no real remorse. Maybe exile to Nevada will give her time to reflect on what she did. I agreed. My anger at Patricia had faded over the years, replaced by something more like pity. She'd had a position of respect and authority, a beautiful home, and a community that had initially trusted her. She'd thrown it all away for what amounted to petty theft and insurance fraud, crimes that netted her maybe $60,000 over 3 years. Now she had a felony record, owed tens of thousands in restitution, and had lost everything. It was a cautionary tale about greed and the corrupting influence of unchecked power. Even on a small scale, Mountain Ridge estates thrived. Property values actually increased as word spread about our genuine community spirit and effective HOA management. New families moved in, and we made sure to tell them the story, not to scare them but to illustrate how we'd overcome a toxic situation and built something better. I proposed to Sarah on the deck of my house, with Lake Tahoe spread out before us, the mountains dusted with the first snow of the season. She said yes, and we planned a summer wedding at the community clubhouse. The whole neighborhood was invited, and it felt right to celebrate our union in the place that had become our true home. During the reception, Barbara gave a toast that got a little emotional. Ryan came to Mountain Ridge Estates as a stranger and became our conscience. When faced with injustice, he didn't back down or move away. He stood up, documented everything, and pursued justice through proper channels. In doing so, he freed all of us from a tyrant we'd been too intimidated to confront. This community is stronger because of people like Ryan and Sarah, people who believe neighbors should lift each other up, not tear each other down. To the happy couple, everyone raised their glasses, and I felt Sarah squeeze my hand. This was what I'd wanted when I moved to Tahoe. A community, a home, a place where people genuinely cared about each other. It had taken a bizarre incident with stolen snow chains and a criminal trial to get here, but it was worth it. 5 years after the incident, I received a letter in the mail with a Nevada postmark. Inside was a handwritten note from Patricia. Ryan, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand if you throw this away without reading it. But I wanted you to know that I've been in therapy and working on understanding why I did what I did. My therapist says I have control issues, and that being HOA president fed into my worst impulses. That doesn't excuse anything, but it helps me understand it. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I am genuinely sorry for what I did to you and everyone else. You were just trying to get to work, to help people, and I stopped you because I couldn't handle anyone not following what I said. That was wrong. I hope you're doing well and that the community has moved past what I did to it. Patricia. I showed the letter to Sarah. What do you think? She read it carefully. It sounds genuine, not asking for anything, taking responsibility. Do you want to respond? I don't know. Part of me wants to just let it stay in the past. That's fair. But maybe responding would give you both closure. I thought about it for a few days, then wrote a brief response. Patricia, I appreciate you taking responsibility and working on yourself. What you did was wrong and hurt a lot of people, but I hope you're building a better life now. The community has moved past it and is thriving. I've moved on too. I wish you well in your continued growth. Ryan. I mailed it and felt a weight lift. That chapter was truly closed now. The snow chains, both the destroyed original set and the replacement set I'd bought during the crisis, I kept in my garage on a shelf. They'd become something of a conversation piece, physical evidence of a bizarre experience that had changed my life and my community in unexpected ways. Visitors would ask about them and I'd tell the story, watching their expressions shift from amusement to disbelief to anger at Patricia's actions. And she actually went to prison for it, they'd ask. 18 months, though she was sentenced to 3 years, plus restitution and probation. Turns out stealing from neighbors and committing insurance fraud has real consequences. The story even got picked up by a few podcasts and YouTube channels that focused on HOA horror stories. I declined most interview requests, but I did do one with a legal podcast that focused on HOA law reform. The host was fascinated by how a relatively minor theft had uncovered a much larger pattern of fraud. What advice would you give to people facing similar situations with their HOAs? The host asked. Document everything. Take photos, save emails, record interactions if your state allows it. Know your rights. HOA authority is limited by law even if they act like it isn't. And don't be intimidated. Many HOA boards count on residents being too scared or too busy to fight back. If something is genuinely wrong, pursue it through proper channels. File police reports if crimes occur. Contact lawyers if your rights are violated, and don't accept abuse of power just because it's easier than fighting. The podcast episode got a lot of attention, and I received emails from people across the country dealing with similar situations. I tried to respond to all of them with encouragement and practical advice. It felt good to turn my experience into something that could help others. Now, 7 years after Patricia stole my snow chains during that blizzard, I'm sitting in my home office, looking out at another winter storm blanketing Lake Tahoe. My chains are in the garage, ready if I need them for a hospital shift. Sarah is downstairs making dinner, and I can hear our daughter, Emma, laughing at something on TV. Mountain Ridge Estates has become the place I always hoped it would be. We have block parties in summer, caroling in winter, and a genuine sense of community year-round. The HOA functions exactly as it should, maintaining common areas, enforcing reasonable rules, and serving the residents instead of ruling them. Sometimes I think about how different things could have been. If I'd just let Patricia keep the chains, if I'd moved away after she returned them destroyed, if I'd accepted her lies about the storm damaging them. But I didn't do any of those things. I stood up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable and uncertain. And in doing so, I helped create something better for everyone. The blizzard outside intensifies, but inside I'm warm and safe, surrounded by family in a community that genuinely cares for its members. My phone buzzes with a message from the HOA group chat. Barbara is checking that everyone has what they need for the storm, offering to coordinate supply runs or wellness checks for elderly residents. I respond that we're all good here, then add, happy to shuttle any medical workers to the hospital if needed. Have chains and winter driving experience. 3 people respond thanking me, though none need rides tonight. It's the offer that matters, the knowledge that in this community, we look out for each other. Sarah calls up that dinner is ready. I close my laptop and head downstairs, grateful for the life I've built here, grateful for the community that emerged from conflict and became stronger for it. And yes, even grateful for that bizarre day when Patricia Hennington stole my snow chains during a blizzard. Because that day, and everything that followed, taught me what it really means to stand up for what's right and to be part of a genuine community. The storm rages outside, but inside there's warmth, love, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice, however delayed, does eventually arrive for those patient and brave enough to pursue it.